Chairman. But there's just one or two things I want to say before I start on behalf of all the people who have been involved in the organisation of this meeting. I'd like to personally thank my colleague in Leeds, Chris Allen, for the work he's done in organising this meeting. I can tell you, 30 years involvement in nationalism, I've never known anybody work so hard and ask for so little recognition in return. So thanks very much, Chris, for what you've done. As I say, I live in Leeds, but I would like to just put on record where I stand personally, for the benefit of people who don't know why I'm supporting this meeting. As I just said, I was involved in nationalism about 30 years ago initially. I followed our main speaker, John Tyndall, 23 years ago in founding the movement which became the British National Party. I supported that movement for 20 years until about 3 years ago it came as something as a shock to me when I realised that I was no longer able to support that movement with a clear conscience. I won't go into too much detail about why that was, but I can tell you that after 27 years, you do develop something of an instinct about these things, and I knew that something was not right. It was further illustrated when I realised that the new party leadership was deliberately embarking on a policy of eradicating all the long-term, dedicated activists, people who had built the party up. They were deliberately eliminating them from any position of influence and replacing them with people with either no track record or completely green and no experience. Obviously, that was against the national order. If an army did that, that sacked all experienced officers and put the squaddies in charge, it would be a recipe for disaster. Unless, of course, the people doing it wanted the army to fail. And so what I decided to do when I was convinced that something was wrong, I decided to form an alliance with other like-minded people who had similar experiences in other areas to ensure that when there was increasing disillusionment with the BNP, which I was convinced would eventually happen, there would be something of a safety net for the genuine nationalists to turn to, though they wouldn't be lost. It's no consolation to me, it gives me no satisfaction whatever, 3 years on, to say that all those fears have been entirely justified, and more. Since then we've seen the party that's supposed to be the guardian, the custodian of the British race and heritage and culture. We've seen them putting seats in turbans on party political broadcasts. We've seen candidates standing for them with black relations. We've seen Jewish rabbis writing in the papers, giving their ideas what should be done. We've seen hot wreaths laid on Remembrance Day to commemorate the alleged Holocaust and the Second World War. And now, after repeatedly denying that they had any intention of doing this, we've had an official announcement that non-whites will be allowed into the British National Party. I'm just wondering how long it will be before it's party policy to make an annual delegation to Tel Aviv and singing my Yiddish along. I'm probably learning the words. And these are the people that have called us splitters of nationalism. We're the splitters. We stand exactly where we were when the BNP was founded. The people who are splitting nationalism are the people who have betrayed the sacrifice of everything. Now, the simple truth is that what they seem bent on ignoring, the fact is that you cannot be a British nationalist, a racial nationalist. In fact, you can't be a nationalist of any kind unless you recognise the arch enemy and the counterforce of the nation state, which today we call the One World Order, and which we can see in its present guise evidenced in the Middle East. If anyone says that our policy is outdated, tell them that right now, in the 21st century, the biggest threat to world peace and to our racial survival is there in the Middle East with the American superpower, which has become nothing more than the occupying army of Zionism.
Correct.
And it's backing without any conscience whatsoever, without any reservation. It's giving unqualified and brazen support for the State of Israel in its policy of aggression against the Palestinian people, and its blatant policy of racial supremacism, which is retained only for itself exclusively and denies to every other ethnic group in the West. That anyone, anywhere in the world, as witnessed in Bosnia, anyone who tried to do anything positive about preserving their own territory from an alien invasion will incur military action from the NATO and Zionist forces. Can we doubt that they would use that against us if they have the opportunity to do it? And that, my friends, is really why we are here, or I am here today. Our job is to ensure that there will be in this country a genuine party of British racial nationalism which will tackle the real enemy, and we will ensure a future for our children. It's my privilege now to introduce our first speaker. One who is a long-term nationalist like myself, but unfortunately I didn't make his acquaintance until the last crisis in the last couple of years. It's been a pleasure working with him. I've heard him speak twice before. I've been very impressed, and I'm sure today will be no exception. From Lancashire, let me introduce Mr. Peter Russian.
Thank you very much for that excellent introduction. It's a particular privilege for me today to be crossing the Pennines into Yorkshire, to be here in Yorkshire on a nationalist platform at this moment in the summer of 2004. Because just up the road here, the city of Bradford, for all of my life, in fact, all of my life, and perhaps for a large number of people here, that would be the case as well, it would be all of their lives, has been known throughout the world as the most notorious example of alien invasion of a white community, known throughout the world. Now, I'm pleased and proud to say, Bradford is known for something else. Bradford is known as one of the main places where white Britons are fighting back against that. Indeed so. Now, ladies and gentlemen, racial comrades, I can only imagine the impact on those of you who are actually from Bradford, from that area. The impact, the emotional impact that made, that those victories made just a few weeks ago. Because no doubt you'd had to get used over the years, travelling around the country, travelling around Europe, travelling around the world, telling people, I'm from Bradford, seeing in their eyes, seeing people's reaction, thinking, poor devil, how does he put up with it, you know? Sooner him than me, you know? How does he put up with that? Now, you can go around the white world, look people in the eye and say, I'm from Bradford, with pride. With pride. We look forward, all of us in this room, I'm sure, we look forward to the day when in many other areas, many other cities and towns around this country, and particularly around the north of England, both sides of the Pennines, when Leeds no longer means Chapeltown, when Manchester no longer means Moss Side, when Oldham no longer means Glodwick, but when all of these places have been liberated from their alien occupation, we look forward to that day. When Leeds, when Manchester, when Oldham, and many, many more no longer provoke this reaction of people, of a sort of confusion of fear and pity in people when you say you come from these places. Oh, there's lots of Pakis in that area, aren't there? There's lots of blacks in that area. Oh dear, yes, we know about those areas. But a time when the merest mention of such a place around the world sparks a reaction of pride in the hearts of white patriots around the world. A reaction of pride, not just nationwide, but worldwide. Now, of course, before you think we're getting too carried away here, I, of course, recognise, as we all recognise in this room, that we've only made a start. We've only made a start. But what an excellent start's been made. Further victories aren't going to be easy. People aren't going to roll over and play dead. Further victories will involve sacrifices, just as these victories involved sacrifices. Sacrifices of time, sacrifices of money. Yes, in some cases, sacrifices of pride, personal likes and dislikes within the movement, personal ambitions, having to be set aside for the greater good. All of these sacrifices will at different stages and in different places, according to circumstance, have to be made. Having to bury the hatchet on old feuds. And, you know, some people in the movement who might call me an extremist, and there are one or two who might call me such a thing, might be surprised at what I'm about to say, but I accept, and I'm sure everybody on this platform accepts, that at certain times and places we need to persuade the British people. Politics is about persuading people. That the British people, okay, we know, thankfully we know, the British people aren't as weak as our lords and masters in Whitehall and the masters of the New World Order believe them to be. They're not as weak as the masters of the New World Order believe. But neither are they, by and large, as strong as the people in this audience. If the entire British people were already as strong as the people in this audience, we would already have won. The battle would be over. They wouldn't have allowed the monstrosities of the past half century to occur.
Well said, Peter.
So, yes, of course, we all accept. And let's not fall into this trap of believing that the division in British nationalism is between crazed extremists or idealists or whatever you want to call us and pragmatic moderates. That's not the division at all. We all accept, this is common ground, I would have thought, of everybody in nationalism, that the British people need to be persuaded of the rightness of our cause, and that appropriate tactics have to be used at appropriate times and places in order to win them over. But ladies and gentlemen, one sacrifice we must never make. Because one sacrifice just sells out the entire struggle. We must never sacrifice our fundamental principles. Our most fundamental principles must never be sacrificed. Because no vote, no salary, no council seat, no parliamentary seat in Westminster or Brussels is worth having if, in order to get it, we have to abandon and sell forever, sell irreversibly, the very purpose of being in politics in the first place. Is there anyone in this room who would, in return for the European parliamentary seat and salary of Robert Kilroy-Silk, adopt the political principles of Robert Kilroy-Silk? Would anybody in this room be prepared to accept his salary in return for having to accept his politics and adopt and proclaim his politics? Would anybody here accept that Faustian pact? I very much doubt it. Last year, the United Kingdom Independence Party held a public meeting in my own town, as it happened. And so I went in the town hall in my own town. I went down to it, addressed by their party leader and by their @1 candidate for the North West, Dr. John Whittaker, an economist who's now a European MP. And at the end of Mr. Knapman's speech, Roger Knapman, who you may be forgiven for not knowing, is actually the leader of UKIP for the time being, until he's being measured, I think, for his political coffin by Kilroy-Silk. But for the time being, they're measuring him up for his coffin, rather like, if you ever saw a film called Carry On Cowboy, they had where people were being shot, there was an undertaker in this town, who whenever anybody came in was sort of weighing them up for the coffin. I think that's about the stage of UKIP's at the moment. But Mr. Knapman was asked by some awkward soul in the audience asked him about their racial and immigration policies, and he said, I made a careful note of his reply. He said, we are not the BNP. If someone's here illegally, I say get rid of him, but if someone's here legally, I don't care if he's white, black, yellow or polka dot, he's welcome to stay. That was Mr. Knapman's policy. So, for the time being, as far as I'm concerned, and I would hope most of us here, let's forget about asylum seekers and illegal immigrants for the time being. We know that's an important issue, but hypothetically, let's set that on one side. The fact is that most of us here are living with the consequences of more than half a century of exactly that type of multiracial approach, exactly that colour-blind approach to nationality that was summed up in Roger Natman's answer. That's the problem. UKIP's policy is part of the problem, not part of the solution. Let us, in contrast, not be afraid to speak the truth to the British people. Not be afraid to expose the difference between us and UKIP. Not pretend that we are some sort of broadly similar version of UKIP. Why not vote for us instead? What sort of appeal is that to put to the British people? To say to them quite clearly that you don't have to be balmy, surely, to believe that Britain is essentially a white country. We believe that. UKIP doesn't. If we put that message clearly to the British people, a very large percentage, if not the majority, of those people who voted for UKIP, I'm certain sure, will come back to nationalism, will come back to racial We have nothing to be afraid of in openly saying to the British people that for us, British nationality is not a legal question, it's a racial question. It's not something, British nationality is not something that we wish to be negotiated in the courts or at Westminster or in the European Parliament. It's not something that, noticing just on the way here actually, it's not something to be thrashed out by the bureaucrats sitting in the office that we passed on the road on the way here, the Home Office Immigration and Nationality Directorate that we drove past on the way. Some of you may have seen one of their big offices there. It's not a bureaucratic issue, a legalistic issue. It is part of the very fibre of our existence, British nationality. If anyone doubts the nature of our struggle, let them look just at two things. Just at two things. Let them look, and this touches on something mentioned by the chairman, at Jack Straw. That one individual, Mr. Straw, our Foreign Secretary, sums up in himself the nature of the struggle we face. That this man should be in charge of the foreign affairs of the United Kingdom. That this man should be the representative of Britain abroad, deciding when British force should be used abroad. This is a man who, as we will find out later this week, as we're authoritatively told in the leaks of the Butler report, who was prepared, in the interests of of some mysterious masters of whom we know little, in the interests of those mysterious masters, he was prepared not only to go against what you and I and every sensible person in the country said, not just that, he was prepared to overrule the legal advice of his own legal advisor, his own civil servant. Not some crazy Nazi, some anti-Semite, some racial nationalist fruitcake, a lifelong civil servant, somebody who'd already sold their soul to Whitehall, but who still had the decency and the common sense to recognise that there was no legal basis for the war in Iraq. He overruled that legal advice. And the legal advisor concerned, by the name of Elizabeth Wilmshurst, resigned as a consequence. And with a bit of luck, just for once, the British government may have to face the music later this week. Now, in the case of Jack Straw, this flexible approach to both legality and morality is nothing new. Because he's got form, has Mr. Straw, on these matters. He's got past form that we can judge him on. In the 1970s, before he was even an MP, when he was working as the right-hand man to Barbara Castle in Harold Wilson's cabinet, Mr. Straw was in charge of doing the dirty work on weeding out the national insurance file of a man by the name of Norman Scott, who some of you may remember. A close friend, shall we say, we're not going to any more forensic details than that, of the then leader of the Liberal Party, Jeremy Thorpe, who had employed him. No doubt Mr. Scott had certain special skills that justified it. But again, we'll not go into the details. But he'd been employed by Mr. Thorpe, who paid his national insurance stamp. Or more to the point, some of the time not paid it. Hence there was this big dispute. And Barbara Castle thought, oh, I don't want to handle this, you know. And so her gopher one Mr. Jack Straw had to handle all of that. So having started off doing the dirty work and it doesn't get much dirtier, for his political masters, he's carried on throughout his career doing that. And is now, Her Britannic Majesty's Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs. How marvellous. What a wonderful job. So that's one thing that we can look at that illustrates the nature of our struggle. The other one, just look at the poison fed to our children by our multicultural, multiracial masters. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen, might be on the cover, the front cover, of a guide to the Imperial War Museum North? Any ideas what might be on the cover to that museum guide? Perhaps something about the Accrington Pals, something about the Manchester Blitz, something of that nature. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'll show you. That's what's on the cover. That's what's on the cover of the guide to the Imperial War Museum North. Now, when I first saw this, my first reaction, since it was the Imperial War Museum North, I thought, oh yes, I thought of Corporal Jones in Dad's Army. And when you talk about the fuzzy wuzzies, this is obviously meant to be an example of a fuzzy wuzzy. Because half a century ago, that's what it would have been. Any face like that in a museum devoted to the military history of the British Empire and military history of the white race, it would have been about Rorke's Drift or Omdurman or something of that nature. Sadly, I have to tell you, it was nothing like that. It was join us for Black History Month this October. We shouldn't laugh, at least it's only a month at the moment. It's going to be all year round. So. A programme of activities and events, including Sound Revolution, a selection of popular black-rooted music that comments on conflict from the Cold War to the present day. Classical Indian music with the trio Raga Jyoti, forming a celebration of classical Indian music with vocalist, harmonium, tabla drum, trantura and Indian harp. All the stuff. What the heck it's got to do with British military history, I don't know. But you know, it's like Henry Ford said about, in a very different context, about motor cars. It doesn't have to be anything to do with military history to get it to the Imperial War Museum North. You can have any colour there as long as it's black. So in conclusion, how do we begin to fight back? Well, we seek our inspiration by looking at what happened in Ashton-under-Lyne. Or should I say, we see what not to do by looking at what happened in Ashton-under-Lyne just the other week during the European Championship. A chap there walking on his way home from watching an England game on the big screen, wearing an England football shirt. An England football shirt. What could be more innocent than that? On his way home, not in a particularly heavily Asian-infested area, but an area where there are enough of them now for them to think that they rule the roost, he was accosted by an Asian gang for the temerity of wearing an England shirt. He protested to them, accurately it seems, "I'm not a racist, I'm a social worker. I'm not a racist." That's what he said. "I'm not a racist, I'm a social worker." But it availed him nothing. He was beaten to the ground, he was knifed, and left in a pool of blood. That's what the partial surrender of adopting the enemy's language and the cringing response. This cringing response of "I'm not racist." That's where it gets you. Beaten up and left in a pool of blood. There is, ladies and gentlemen, no possibility, much as it may seem a seductive soft option, no possibility of a partial surrender. No possibility of saying, "We are nationalists but not racists. We aren't racists, we are patriots," or whatever, trying to adopt the enemy's language, this Trotskyite word of racism that somehow seems to have been adopted, even by some people in our own party. Let us tell those people that we reject the possibility of a partial surrender. We reject the possibility of being almost a virgin, almost an all-white party, just letting a few in. We give the party leadership, for what may be the last time, and odd though it sounds coming from me, let us give them hypothetically the benefit of the doubt that perhaps there may at some point be some sort of legal problem over the issue of preventing non-whites from joining. But surely, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, before we do anything else on this, we need a proper professional legal opinion on that situation. Not the surmise of some friend of Nick's, some amateur hobbyist who takes an interest in the law, who floats a few ideas at an advisory council meeting. Because, of course, our enemies, both within and without, are very clever in the way they can phrase things, which means there's a very grave danger of being panicked into the surrender of fundamental principles. Now, I would argue, I think all of us here would argue, there may come a point where we have to take a stand. Let us find out the legal position first, then work out the correct tactical response. Isn't this common sense? After all, many of us, including Nick Griffin personally, applauded the man in the North East who was known as the metric martyr in the North East, who resisted when he was told that he had to use metric scales on his greengrocer's stall, and got a very excellent vote in Sunderland after mounting that brave resistance. Yet, where the metric martyr was prepared to stand up for himself, we're now being told, or some people are saying, in our own movement, that the British National Party should surrender its basic principles at the very first hint of a legal problem. Not when nobody's talking about defying the courts at the moment, but at the very first hint of a legal problem. We're told we should surrender our principles, not even attempt to mount a defence. So on that basis, those people, in our own movement, I'm ashamed to say, are prepared to argue, in contrast to the metric martyr, that the very blood in our veins, ladies and gentlemen, is worth less than a pound of carrots.
Peter, these people are doing this without the interests of the members. This has got to go to a membership vote before anything.
Indeed, so I agree with you 100%. So let us say to those members, when we go out from this meeting to our various branches up and down the country, let us say to those members, let us have the courage to reject the fake nationalism of UKIP, and also to reject the fake nationalism of some of those in our own party. I am 100% confident. The overwhelming majority of this movement, all they need is the courage to stand up for themselves, a bit of moral support from those of us in this room, to go out to those who aren't here today, but who agree with us, and to give them some backbone to help them stand up for themselves. Let us, and let them, boldly assert that for us, British means more than a passport. British means more than a flag, more than a collection of different football teams, more than the Queen's head on a banknote, more than pounds and ounces. Let us assert that without white racial solidarity, British nationalism is nothing. With white racial solidarity, our eventual victory is certain. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Peter, for a speech up to your usual very high standard. I'm sure that was very much appreciated by the audience. I look forward to hearing you again before too long. Our next guest speaker is colleague in Yorkshire, I'm sure if you're from Yorkshire, you certainly won't need any introduction to him. One of the few people who was well established in Yorkshire before I had even heard of nationalism. And he was well respected then. I remember people in Hull talking about him and what a character he was and what a great nationalist he was. And he was one of the few people who had been active for longer than himself, in fact. So it was a pleasure to work with him. He's a good friend, a personal friend as well. My privilege to introduce to you from Leeds, Mr. Eddie Morrison.
I'm witnessing a disappearing audience. I presume they're just going to the toilet or something. There will be time for drinks, as the chairman said after the interval. And I think the young gentleman on my left will be saying a few words in the second half of the meeting, whoever he may be.
Speaking of drink, without any.
First of all, I'd like to welcome you to Leeds, the holy city as some call it, but nobody in this room. The home of one of the big centres of white nationalism in the past, certainly in the National Front days, as some of my old NF comrades sat here today would say. And a time when we made it a centre of white nationalism. A place where in the 1970s and the early 80s and through to the middle 80s, we were the first city in Britain to become red-free. It cost us 17 arrests, me personally. A lot of other guys in this room and who aren't here today, arrested and jailed. But it may seem, we live in days now where the powers that be in charge of nationalism, not in this room, said that there's got to be no confrontation with the red scum. We said that if we're going to have meetings that are not going to have to be booked under the Tropical Fish Society, or if we're going to have our boys and girls going out there on the streets, men and women going on the streets, selling their papers safely, if we're going to have people putting out leaflets that have to go out at 3 o'clock in the morning with a miner's lamp on, in case they get attacked by a load of communist scum, then we must again, and this may be a controversial thing to say, we must again be willing as men and women, as white nationalists, to stand up to the red scum on the streets and tell them, we control the streets. And I'm speaking as somebody, believe me, who every Saturday when my wife said goodbye to me on a Saturday morning when I was going off selling National Front News or British Nationalist later on, didn't know whether she was going to see me till Monday or Tuesday. Because usually it was an anti-Nazi league in those days, it still is. Usually there was a pretty good, what the Germans call Soundschlacht, there was a pretty good street fight. And we did it on purpose, we were determined, and we drove the Reds from Leeds, and later on, I think Jerry and Stuart told me, we drove them from Bradford as well. And white nationalists and nationalists of all, older people, older men and women, younger people, could come back on the streets, we could book our rooms under our own names, because the Reds dare not come anywhere near us. The Reds could not approach our paper sellers. And we had the opposite effect of putting people off this violence. What it had the effect of was making people feel safe at our meetings. It made them feel safe when they were selling papers. It made them feel safe when they were putting out leaflets. So I'd say for the future time, one of the things we want to tackle, we're talking about race a lot today, but one of the things we want to tackle is get back on the streets and confront these scum and kick them back in the gutter where they belong. Say that I carry a permanent scar for the rest of my life as a result of that.
Honourable.
I'm a founder member of the British National Party too, from the new National Front. When John Tyndall walked away from a party that the National Front had become, which was untenable. We would possibly suspect the BNP is becoming untenable, but John Tyndall will have more to say in that in his main speech. We walked away from that and we founded the new National Front, which rapidly became the British National Party. We have every right to criticise, we have every right, as Peter says, and as Sonia said, we have every right to take these people to task who are selling out the principles of racial nationalism, because these people on this platform, and many people among you, founded the BNP. There would have been no BNP without us. So we have every right to criticise these people, every right. It's not that we've sat back and watched it all happen. We were there in the first place to establish it. We were the people at the vanguard of it. And I myself, and I'll have to blow my own trumpet for a little while, I actually helped, I think John will back me up on this, I helped put the BNP firmly on the map, not just the United Kingdom-wise, but on world-wise. In 2 meetings we had in 1989, public meetings, publicly booked under the British National Party name, firstly in Darlington, and secondly in Dewsbury. The first one in Darlington, the Reds rioted. All the young people of Darlington flocked to our side because we hoisted the BNP banner quite clearly for all to see. I stood up there with a megaphone. Hundreds of white youths around us, and we got news spread right across the north, and it cost us one megaphone. Next week, we booked a small meeting, open air, in Dewsbury. I remember talking to the Chief of Police in Dewsbury at the time. I walked round to have a look at the site, which is outside Dewsbury Post Office, which is still there. And he said, will it be a small meeting? I said, yes, 10 minutes, I said, and 50, 60 people coming along. If you keep the Asians away, we'll probably have a small, quiet meeting. And this poor, foolish officer actually believed me. Not that I've got anything against the police now, so take the cuffs off. What happened that day in July 89, I believe it was, what happened that day was, we, again, openly, without any hidden names or anything, advertised all over the place that there was going to be a British National Party public meeting in the centre of Dewsbury. Every white youth from miles around came to that meeting. When I arrived at the public meeting site, I could hardly get to the platform. There were so many young white lads and lasses there, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. The Asians, obligingly, on account of some awful person putting out a message to Bradford in particular, saying I was going to burn the Quran on stage. It was an absolute lie, of course. Didn't you? But they rioted obligingly. We got world publicity, and I mean world publicity. We had CNN helicopters above our heads. John Tyndall stood next to me on that platform that day. We got world publicity, day after day after day. We put the British National Party on the map, not by sneaky methods, not by pretending to be somebody else, not by getting rid of our principles, but by standing up there as white warriors with the Union Jack and the flags of our nation in our hand, giving the white youth the white power speeches that they wanted to come to listen to, and we put the British National Party on the map, and it cost us £27.50. And that's what being open and being a white warrior is about. Just briefly going over the Griffin problem, because I don't want to bore you too much, and neither do I want to steal John Tyndall's thunder, because I think he's going to give a fairly good summation of the whole thing. My opinion is basically that these people have just got to be getting out of the way, so that we can get at the real enemy. And the real enemy is, at the moment, it's these people that are blocking white nationalism, progress of white nationalism. We've got a situation similar that we had to walk away from in 1982 in the National Front, when a cabal of national Bolsheviks, or third positionists, or whatever they want to call themselves, led by Mr. Nick Griffin, who at that time was a national Bolshevik, coupled with an unholy cabal of homosexuals, Martin Webster and Michael Salt and Company, ejected, or rather sickened Mr. Tyndall off so much that he took the better people, the honourable people, out of the National Front, formed the BNP, and we left them to their own devices, and they crumbled. They just went away. I know there's a National Front today, there's some good lads in it, but they squabbled and crumbled while the BNP went on from strength to strength to strength. And had it not been taken over in 1998, it would have been, I know it's going to be quite strong today, but who knows what will, and who knows what will happen. So my real concern is clear these people out of the way, one way or another, clear them out of the way. They're an irrelevance in the great scheme of things. Clear them out of the way so we can get on with building a national revolution in this country. The real enemy of white nationalism in this country is Zog and the New World Order. Make no bounds about that whatsoever. The white race has been retreated. It's been on the retreat all through history. I've said this before in past speeches. It's no less true today, because I'm saying it again. Right through history, civilization after civilization has crumbled through integration, through miscegenation, and through race mixing. The great civilizations of Egypt and Greece and Rome and many, many others have crumbled and been destroyed through what we're seeing in our own country today. Race mixing and miscegenation destroys cultures. It destroys all cultures. It's bad for all races, actually. Black, brown and white. I've not heard of polka dot one. So if I ever see a polka dot one, I'll take answer to the first one. And we've nowhere else to retreat to. All through history, if you look at history, all through history, we've been on the retreat back to our ancestral homelands in Northern Europe. And that's where we are today. And now our ancestral homelands are being overrun. Now our ancestral homelands are being flooded out by Pakistanis, Uzbekistan, you name it. Okay, there's such a long list of them, it's impossible to tell. But we have nowhere else to retreat to. What are we all going to do? If I end up in Greenland as the last white place, it's pretty cold up there, you know. I think we've got our backs to the wall here. I think today we're facing the Alamo of the white people. We are the last fighters for white nationalism. And if we and our comrades in America and our comrades in Europe, right through to Russia, where we've got good white nationalists, we must realise it's a fight on a world scale. And that's where all this pettiness and all this bickering and all this faction fighting has got to be swept out of the way so that we can move forward alongside our comrades in all these other countries where they're fighting the last-ditched Alamo of the white race as well. So that the white race itself moves forward. The New World Order is attacking us on a world basis. We must fight back on a white world basis too. Yeah. Peter has said about abandoning principles, and that's true, that is what they're doing. They're throwing away the very bedrock of white nationalism. But what is the very bedrock of white nationalism? Our uniform. The one that we all wear today, whatever our little factions are, or whatever differences we've got over little things, we all have one uniform. And that's our white skin, and they can never take it off us. Right? They can take it off our kids, and they can take it off our grandkids if they mix them enough, but they can't take it off us. We've got it. The Spirit Support Group was formed in March. It's the official sponsor of today's meeting. I'm hoping that it will be the backbone of the fight back, or part of the backbone of the fight back, along with all the very, very good people in the BNP, and the other parties, not forgetting the WMP, the National Front, and elements of other parties, in coming together and forming that greater movement we all dream about. That greater movement when we're all no longer compartmentalised, when there's no more factions any longer, when there's a great, white, united movement marching forward under one banner. Yeah. The Speahead Support Group, we have three principles, handed to us by John Tyndall. 3 words: comradeship, loyalty and honour. And what is comradeship? Comradeship is not seeing a comrade down on his luck, not or her luck, not backbiting just for the sake of backbiting, not seeing somebody going without who's a white nationalist when you can help them. That's comradeship. Standing together when they've been attacked by the red filth, or if they're under pressure from the law, helping out, helping each other and standing together, just like soldiers do on a battlefield. They don't start quibbling about who's got the biggest musket or whose uniform's the cleanest. The enemy's in front of them, and that's who they face. And that's what we've got to do, and that's what comradeship's about. Loyalty. Loyalty to our flags, loyalty to our symbols, and most of all, loyalty to our uniform, the white race. And lastly, honour. And to me that is one of the most important words of the lot. Honour, the thing that the people that have taken over, hijacked in my opinion, and I can speak as I'm banned from the British National Party. I'm also banned from the Labour Party, which is quite nice. Good for you. I'm also banned from the Anti-Jewish Defence League.
Was that for?
Sorry, Jewish Defence League. Anyway, honour. Honour is the ability to stand up and proclaim proudly that you're a white nationalist, that you have honour with it. The honour is the honour not to backtrack on your principles, to stand with pride and say, I don't care. I don't want this sneaky way to power. I don't want to have to compromise this, that and the other for the sake of becoming a councillor at the church council and arguing about the well at the top of the road. We're on about an absolute fight to the finish, a racial fight, and that's where honour comes into it. Without honour, without loyalty, and without comradeship, we're nothing. With loyalty, with honour, with comradeship, all of you in this room must have those 3 things. We are the greatest force on earth. We're the vanguard of a white people that will rise up and shake the foundations of this country like nothing you've ever seen before. The battle lines are now more clearly drawn than they've ever been. We know who's on our side and we know who's against us. And those in the nationalist world that pretend to be nationalists and are not on our side, then get out of our way or stand with us. That's your choice. When I went to see the Return of the King, the last part of the Lord of the Rings, marvellous film. Not one non-white in it, which made it quite nice. Not that I'm a racist, of course. I watched the Dark Armies of Mordor, the people literally made out of mud, which rang a bell. The orcs and all these strange troll-like creatures, the Dark Armies, moving forward against these lines of white men, elves, dwarves, whatever, the different peoples, but the good peoples of the earth, fighting the evil darkness of Mordor, the Dark Armies. And I thought the Dark Armies was the Dark Armies of the New World Order. And believe me, the Dark Armies of the New World Order, as Tony said in his introduction, are on the march and they're getting bigger. And you don't defeat the Dark Armies of the New World Order by pretending to be part of them, by covering yourself with a bit of mud and running along parallel to them. You defeat them by standing with the rest of your thin band of warriors, men and women, children and older people. The people will say, I am a white nationalist and I will not let the Dark Armies win. I'm a white nationalist and I will hold the shield of our symbols before us and I'll stand and we will defeat them. Or we will go down trying, we'll be carried back upon our shields. Sneakiness is out of the window. Sneakiness is not the white person's way of fighting. Sneakiness and cleverness, it's all this cleverness and political realism. It's not for me. This isn't politics. This is a war for the very survival of our people. It's got nothing to do with how many council bins are out and all the irrelevancies that are called politics these days. We're now at the very core of the heart of the matter. It's a war for the very survival. Will there be, by the year 2060, any more white people in this country? Or will we just be a great multiracial mishmash? That's the question. And that's the answer. It's a war. We have to stand up, just like our ancestors did, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, or not too long ago. Our ancestors, when masses of invaders came ashore on the beaches, didn't go down shaking hands with them and setting up little, imagine the Saxons or whatever, setting up little tables on the beaches, welcoming all the immigrants and saying, check in here for your gyro checks in Saxon money. I think there have been a few battle axes being sharpened. No, we went out and we, if somebody was going to take our country over, we had something to say about it. Apparently, if somebody's taking your country over these days and you have anything to say about it, you go to jail. Yeah. That's the traitors who's in charge of the So I ask you, do you want half measures? Do you want compromise? Do you want to go along with these people and be clever and sneaky and lose in the end because that's all that happened? Or do you want a total war against Zog in this country? Yeah. We will, when we take power, throw the hideous laws that they've foisted upon us, the race laws and the Public Order Acts and God knows what else, we will throw into the dustbin of history where they belong. We will free the men and women that have been put into jail because they've dared to speak the truth. Just like my colleague on my left-hand side who has been in prison for speaking the truth. We will free them. We will free our people. We will make freedom a right and a proper thing to have again. We will have total war. That's what they've decided. They're going to push the white people this far. This is what they're going to back. Do you want total war? Yeah. Total war? That's what we're going to get. Yeah. I'll say this. I'll finish on this note. I believe in John Tyndall. I've known him since I was 18 years old when he told me my name was Anglo-Saxon, Edmund. And I went, I'm going to hide for the next 6 months. And John Tyndall told me I've got an Anglo-Saxon name. I am. Down in Palace Chambers.
Inspiration to a soldier.
I'll say this to you. Stick by the principles. Stay by your principles, because the sneaky way is not the way to win. Our way, the hard way, is the way to win. The path to power lies through the dungeons, not sneaking up dressed as the retainers of the Zog minions. We're having total war. We're going to build a movement. It's either going to be the BNP or a greater thing than the BNP. I don't know what. I don't know what's to come. I know something's to come, very big. And I say this as a final thing. John Tyndall, you lead us and we'll follow you.
Always a pleasure, mate, and we agree with every word you said.